Gerald Ford had only been president for 31 days when he sat down in front of the camera in the Oval Office to make a special announcement. It was Sunday, September the 8th, 1974, and the new Republican president had decided to grant a pardon to his predecessor, Richard Nixon. In his televised speech, Ford spoke of the magnitude of his decision. He expressed a desire to move on from the Watergate scandal that had consumed the country for more than 2 years. Quote, "It could go on and on and on, or someone must write the end to it. I have concluded that only I can do that. And if I can, I must," end quote. While Ford's decision to pardon Nixon may have effectively ended the Watergate saga, it didn't provide a neat resolution or a sense of closure. There were still a lot of loose ends to tie up. The pardon preempted further action from the special prosecutor's office and prevented that office from issuing an indictment against Nixon, a possibility that remained very real at the time. 1 month earlier, a memo was submitted to Watergate's special prosecutor, Leon Jaworski, regarding the possible indictment of Nixon. It was written by 2 of his aides, and they were blunt in their assessment of the case. Quote, "In our view, there is clear evidence that Richard M. Nixon participated in a conspiracy to obstruct justice by concealing the identity of those responsible for the Watergate break-in and other criminal offenses," end quote. And the full scope of Nixon's wrongdoings wasn't even entirely clear yet. A separate memo from September the 3rd, 1974, 5 days before the pardon was issued, from another aide, listed 10 distinct matters that were, quote, "still under investigation and may prove to have some direct connection to activities in which Mr. Nixon is personally involved," end quote. Public opinion wasn't on Ford's side either. A Gallup poll from that time found that the majority of Americans, 56%, said they wanted Nixon to face criminal charges. People even came out to protest the pardon. In fact, Ford's approval rating plummeted and never fully recovered. Time, however, has been relatively kind to Ford and his pardon of Nixon. Public opinion has flipped, with the majority of Americans now looking favorably upon Ford's decision. But it demands a re-examination in light of Donald Trump's historic federal indictment and the prospect of more to come. Ford's pardon of Nixon was a bandage for a wound that required sutures. Trump has reopened that wound. It's debatable whether a man as shameless as Richard Nixon, like Donald Trump himself, would have been humbled by the threat of a possible conviction. But maybe if Ford had at least let the process play out, Nixon would have been made an example, and Donald Trump would not now be under the notion that presidents get special treatment under the law. Maybe Nixon himself could have been convinced that there are limits to presidential powers, and maybe when he sat down for an interview with the British journalist David Frost several years later, after Watergate, in 1977, Nixon wouldn't have professed his belief that, quote, "when the president does it, that means it's not illegal." And maybe one of Nixon's successors would not have been brazen enough to hoard classified documents and government records and share Nixon's sentiments about the absolutism of presidential authority.
If you're the president of the United States, you can declassify just by saying it's declassified, even by thinking about it, because you're sending it to Mar-a-Lago or to wherever you're sending it. And there doesn't have to be a process. There can be a process, but there doesn't have to be.
It's not a coincidence that there are echoes of Richard Nixon in Donald Trump. The two struck up a friendship in the final decade of Nixon's life, and a few years ago, the Richard Nixon Foundation unearthed personal letters between the two men. In a letter dated June 1982, Trump told Nixon, quote, "I think that you're one of this country's great men." In another correspondence from January 1993, Trump wrote, quote, "I have always had and always will have the utmost respect and admiration for you." Now, some people learned the wrong lessons from Watergate. Richard Nixon and what he did in Watergate should not be anybody's role model. The same can be said about Donald Trump, twice impeached, twice indicted, and still facing a multitude of legal troubles. Now, with some of the Republican Party presidential candidates already vowing, if elected president, to pardon Trump like Ford pardoned Nixon, it's more important than ever that we let this judicial process play out. We like to say that in the U.S. no one is above the law, but the history of Watergate proves that not to be entirely true. We've got a chance to course correct now. Let the process play out. Let Donald Trump face the justice system, and let a jury of his peers, American citizens, decide his fate instead of one of his colleagues who finds political benefit in the matter. It's time for Republicans to heed the prescient warning that former Congresswoman Liz Cheney gave on June 9th of last year, exactly 1 year prior to the unsealing of the federal indictment of Donald Trump.
Tonight, I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain.